Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, we proudly bring to you Mormonism Live!
Shut up and sit down.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Real. How are you doing?
I am so good, Radio Free Mormon. Life treating you well?
Oh, better than I deserved, my friend. You look like you're fresh from the barber shop.
Yeah, this is it's a haircut. I'm not sure if it's a good one or a bad one, but it is a haircut nonetheless.
I hope you didn't leave a tip.
How's that Huntsman trial doing?
Oh, great.
Not much.
Wonderful news. I expect James Huntsman's attorneys are just waking up about this time after an all-night bender in celebration of that ruling that we covered last night at Mormon Stories.
Yeah. They probably had a lot of fun celebrating after all of that, huh?
Oh, yeah, I did. I got like an hour's sleep last night.
Yeah.
But I'm here.
Do you think that thing has some merit? Do you think, we were talking about this earlier, do you think this has legs under it?
The ruling says it all.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make any difference what I think. 2 out of 3 judges say yes, and so it goes forward.
And on to the next stage we go.
Yes.
Awesome.
Well, do you want to tell us anything wonderful, exciting in your life? Any announcements that you have to make before we introduce the subject of tonight's show?
Just got back, I was here last week, of course, but got back from the Grand Canyon. It's such a beautiful thing, and just trying to get back into the swing of things, and life is good. No, we can... Maybe I'll put some things in the comments in terms of things we'd love the listeners to click and visit and know where our donation page is, but nothing pressing.
Okay, well, fantastic. Now, as most of you probably know, Dan Vogel, a preeminent historian on all things Joseph Smith and most things Mormonism, wrote a book recently. It came out a couple of months ago. He was doing the circuit. Part of the circuit included our show where he came on to talk about his new book, Charisma Under Pressure, which deals with Joseph Smith from the years 1831 to 1839. He's already written a previous volume about Joseph Smith before 1831, and he'll be writing, and probably is working on it right now, another book during the Nauvoo period about Joseph Smith. So it's an amazing thing. It's been very well received. There are a lot of people said some really nice things about it on the back cover, including it won the Best Biography Award from the Mormon History Association. So that sounds pretty good. There's a nice blurb from Publishers Weekly, from BYU Studies, from the Journal of Mormon History. Everybody seems to really, really like this book, except for one person. And by the way, I have to announce the title of tonight's show, because this book, in spite of all of its acclaim, upon its reception, received from one LDS scholar a 2-star book review on Amazon. And that LDS scholar who gave this book a 2-star book review is none other than our very own Brian Hales. And that's why the title of tonight's show is Brian Hales and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Book Review.
So
yes.
we're gonna go ahead and bring on Brian Hales. Ready? Oh, no.
Yeah. Get him on here. We have had this announced. By the way, today is August 9th, 2023. Yesterday was August 8th. Remember, that's in 1844 when Brigham Young turned into Joseph Smith, and everybody said, this is the guy. We can see the hand of God upon him because he's looking like and he's talking like Joseph Smith. So he must be the one who's appointed to lead the saints, and we'll follow him anywhere. We'll follow him out to the middle of nowhere. In fact, in Utah. And Maven is joining us from the east, the far east.
Still there, yeah. And I totally forgot what I was going to say now, and now I'm really sad about it. Oh, no,
that's okay. Just take your time and think about it. We'll wait.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to point out that those in the Joseph Smith polygamy denier camp, although Mike from LDS Discussions is normally a very evil anti-Mormon, just, tearing down Joseph Smith, they like that episode. They like the Transfiguration debunk. So, just like they like your RFM, your Apostolic Coup d'etat episodes, that they're on board with those. So just pointing that out.
What I want to know is I want some philosopher to grapple with the question that if Brigham Young turned into Joseph Smith on August 8th, 1844, does that mean in some way that Joseph Smith was responsible for assassinating himself? Your answer to that, Mr. Real? Either you're thinking hard or something else is going on with your GI tract. I'm not sure which. I think I'm going deaf in my old age. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Mr. Real.
Sorry.
What was it?
So
there we go.
Here's my question, which is, do you think in 50 years that story will be in the church curriculum anymore?
Yes.
You think it will?
Because there are witnesses who say that they saw it happen, even though they're all late, and nobody who was present at the time who made a contemporaneous record of the event mentions anything about anything supernatural happening.
So the earliest people weren't even there. The earliest
one of them,
records,
I think it was Orson Hyde. He of
and
the
also
creative
John D. Lee.
imagination.
I think John D. Lee as well.
Perhaps, yeah.
And he also wasn't in town that day.
There is at least one, possibly two people who left affidavits and testimonies about this miraculous event that the historical record upon further examination has disclosed were not even in Nauvoo on August 8th, 1844, when the darn thing was supposed to have happened.
So there's that.
Yes. So I think we've probably talked enough. Can we bring on Dan Vogel? Because what we're going to do is we're going to use... There's Dan. Hello, Dan. How are you tonight? I'm losing my hearing again. Yeah, talk right into the microphone so we can all hear you.
Oh,
Professor
let's try that. I'll take the blame on that one.
Okay.
Go aheid, Dan.
I was just about to fix it.
Are you
but-
punking Dan
This
Vogel?
is what
there?
happens when
you
three
doing that?
guys with the youngest being 44 is trying to do a podcast.
Oh my God. Well, welcome to tonight's show,
The
Dan.
youngest. Yeah. I wish I were the youngest. So I'm doing great.
It feels great,
Great.
believe me, to be the youngest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we're going to be doing
amazing.
tonight, so everyone knows, is we're going to be reading through very quickly Brian Hales' book review, and then we're going to use it as a springboard for Dan to respond to it, because Brian Hales doesn't just write a book review. What he does is he wants to bring up his latest cause celeb. It used to be polygamy for a while. Then he started sticking his nose into the Book of Abraham and mucking that subject up. And his latest infatuation has to do with the Book of Mormon and coming up with a brand new novel and entirely convincing argument for its authenticity, which he can't help but stick into his review. Now, this review is not that long, but he's got to go there because Brian Hales has now become like the old uncle at the family reunion that nobody wants to hang out with, because no matter what the subject of conversation is, he's going to turn it around to start talking about the same old thing that you've heard 100 times before. And this is what Brian's doing. He's going everywhere. He's stopping strangers on the street to tell them about his new defense for the Book of Mormon. So that's what we're going to spend the balance of the night doing. And I thought this would be a wonderful way to frame the discussion, give Dan a chance to respond publicly and gentlemanly. I'm sure he is a scholar and a gentleman, and see if we can make heads or tails out of this defense that Brian Hales has come up with, and whether it's something that really is convincing and persuasive. So, do we have the review? And I'm going to read this at a very quick clip because we'll be coming back to it as we go through. All right, so here's Brian Hales' book review. 2 stars.
part.
Terrible, horrible, no good, very bad book review, which he published at Amazon, it looks like on July 12th, 2023, just a little under a month ago. Here is Brian Hales on Dan Vogel and his new book, Charisma Under Pressure. The theory promoted throughout Charisma Under Pressure, describing Joseph Smith as a pious fraud, fails to accommodate the historical Joseph Smith in 2 important ways. First, it fails to account for Smith's creation of the Book of Mormon. Now, once again, Charisma Under Pressure, Joseph Smith, 1831 to 1839. Okay.
Hey, RFM, what year was the Book of Mormon published?
1830.
Okay, just checking.
So in other words, it occurs outside the time span that this book purports and actually does cover. Yeah. So what Brian's going to be doing, he's going to be busting Dan's chops and getting all up in his grill over not talking about something that is specifically not to be covered in this book.
Do we even know if Moroni
it was the
shows
first book,
up,
right? So here we go.
Hey, RFM, do we even know if Moroni even shows up to visit Joseph after 1830?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
All right, enough of me. Continue on.
But you see, he has to do this. He has to wedge and shoehorn this Book of Mormon defense of his into the conversation somehow, even though it doesn't belong there. First, he goes on. First, it fails to account for first it being Charisma Under Pressure, Dan's book. First, it fails to account for Smith's creation of the Book of Mormon. Charisma does not bestow the composition and oratory skills needed to create a 269,320 word book. With 207 named characters, 77 storylines, 149 geographic locations, 45 socio-geographic groups, 63 sermons comprising over 87,000 words, 100 distinct titles for God, and over 170 new English proper nouns. And importantly, not a single full sentence of his original dictation has been edited since the word stream was spoken, written, and immediately delivered to the printer. Well, we'll come back to that sentence, definitely, as well as others. Because that is the strangest sentence I've ever read. And when you have such an unusual sentence, you know he's covering something up. In his writings, Dan Vogel describes Joseph Smith as a pious fraud. But frauds don't produce books like the Book of Mormon, because it is written. That's the unwritten order of things, Dan. Frauds don't produce books like the Book of Mormon.
They don't?
Until they do, I guess. Only actual authors with literary skills can do that. This fact is ignored throughout Vogel's works. Okay, so now he's saying plural, your works, okay? This fact is ignored throughout Vogel's works, including Charisma Under Pressure, where it wouldn't have been anyway. Assuming Smith had the skills also ignores dozens of eyewitness accounts declaring he didn't. An issue Charisma, the book, fails to address, let alone resolve. Sounds like you're a lazy learner there, Dan. Do we have a second page on this?
Yeah.
All right, this is the balance of his book review. Brian Hales continues, the second glaring problem involves how Vogel portrays the people around Joseph Smith as gullible dupes who couldn't detect what Vogel easily can see nearly 200 years later. This could be a classic case of projection by Brian Hales, I'm not sure. Charisma empowered Smith to deceive all those Mormons. While some of Smith's followers might have been that naive, the vast majority were skeptical and devout Christians. The historical record supports that women like Eliza Snow and Zina Huntington and men like John Taylor and Brigham Young would not have been fooled by a charismatic male as easily as Vogel portrays. By the way, Dan, as an amateur magician, and I know you're one too, I take a special delight when people say dogmatically that a certain person or class of people could never be fooled.
Yeah, I guess they've never watched what is it? The
Amazing Randy, that thing about it, an honest liar.
But the two magicians, Don't Fool Me, Penn and Teller.
Penn and Teller, yeah.
Yeah, they get fooled every now and then too.
Right. These are the guys who, this is their whole life. This is their whole study. This is their whole being. Yeah. And yes, even experts in being in fooling other people can be fooled themselves.
And they can be fooled by psychics.
Yeah, psychics.
Psychics.
Well, we're almost done with this review. I think Fawn Brody would agree. So now he's going to trump you by quoting Fawn Brody against you, Dan. Quoting Fawn Brody, apparently, the best evidence of the magnetism of the Mormon religion was that it could attract men with the quality of Brigham Young, whose tremendous energy and shrewd intelligence were not easily directed by any influence outside himself. That's the end of the quote from Fawn Brody going on. The scenarios depicted through Charisma, the book, seem comic book-like, where Smith's followers behave differently than genuinely sincere and skeptical religionists would have behaved. Last paragraph. It appears that the version of Joseph Smith portrayed by Vogel is a caricature and inadequate. Neither is it clear Smith's followers would have been so blinded by Charisma Under Pressure to Smith's true motives if they were what Vogel declares them to have been. Caution is advised for anyone tempted to embrace the version of Smith and his followers portrayed in Charisma Under Pressure and Vogel's other writings. 2 stars, sir. 2 stars for you. Dan, what was your first response when you read this? And what were the circumstances? Was it pointed out to you by somebody else?
No, I was just reading my reviews, which are mostly positive. And then I saw this one. So it's like a, apologist hit, on my book. And I experienced this before on my first biography, where the apologist kind of showed up and started writing bad reviews to lower the star ratio. And so I figured, oh, this is just the first probably of a barrage of them, but that hasn't happened. And I posted it, and I thought, well, I'll respond to it. I wish I could respond to it right there, but there's no way of actually doing that, I don't think. But so I did on Facebook, and then I got a pretty good response from a lot of post-Mormon, from the post-Mormon community mostly. I don't know if they were all. I bet you there's some, faithful historians or scholars also would probably disagree with Hales' review, because there's a lot of things in it that they probably don't like either, because Hales' review is pretty on the conservative / fundamentalist side of Mormon apologetics. And so the more progressive historians actually allow Joseph Smith to participate very heavily in the writing of the Book of Mormon. So they won't probably disagree. I'm going to be quoting some of them anyway. But so I wrote that, and I did get all those overwhelming responses. And some people went and wrote positive reviews, which I, greatly appreciate. It was really nice to see all of that, the community sticking together like that. And I'm very appreciative, and I thank everybody. If anybody's here, I know Doug Doug was one of them that wrote a positive review, and some others are probably here too. And so,
is that Doug Vincent?
Yeah,
he's
so
great
thank
guy.
you, everybody.
All right, so we've got a bunch more slides to get through tonight as you begin to take Brian Hales apart piece by piece before a live audience.
Yeah, okay. So you can show that. Number 3. Okay, I call this Brian Hales by the numbers.
Clever. Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to look at his numbers, because some of those numbers, they don't have any context.
Right.
They're just numbers and categories, and we're supposed to be intimidated by all of that, I guess. So then we'll go to the next slide, and that's his 2-star review. Which
right, that's what I just read next to a picture of your book.
Yeah,
well, you can tell he's actually being sincere. It's not a hit job because he didn't give you 1 star, Dan.
Yeah, he could have.
Yeah, so that's his fig leaf to show that he's a real scholar and giving a real good scholarly analysis. Are you ready to go to the next page?
Yep, go. So that's me and Brian Hales.
Oh, is that when he has the knife in his left hand, shoving it in your back?
In my back, yeah.
No, with a smile on his face.
So yeah, we see each other at meetings and things, and he's a pretty cordial guy. I'm a cordial guy, and we get along pretty good, I think.
Have you seen him at a meeting since he wrote his review?
No.
What do you expect is going to happen the next time you see him?
Nothing. Well, so he has a perfect right to disagree with my publication and try out his apologetics and his point of view. He's perfectly willing to express it. I don't require my friends to agree with me at all. So they can disagree with me, just like me and Brent.
I think you wasted all that time as a youth you spent learning Jeet Kune Do.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the.
I like jujitsu.
Jujitsu, that is pretty good stuff. Yeah, I wish I would have learned that. Yeah, judo was kind of a wasted time, I thought. But anyway, so.
So you have pictures with him, yes, Brian.
So, yeah. So to be fair, I don't dismiss all of Hales' works either, and I don't harbor any animosity, by the way. So I do cite his book in my book on polygamy, especially with the Fanny Alger affair.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's tried to work it out, and I had my own I tried to work out a solution of what I think happened. He doesn't quite like it, but I ran it by Don Bradley, who was his main source for Fanny Alger, and Don didn't see anything wrong with what I wrote. Anyway, however, I think his recent apologetic work on the Book of Mormon is far too conservative or fundamentalist and doesn't take into account even the views of progressive LDS historians who recognize Joseph Smith's role in producing the Book of Mormon, whether it was a translation or a revelation.
Mm-hmm.
So the next slide was number 6. I think you skipped one. There we are.
What are you winning there? Are you getting an award?
Yeah, Brian Hales is giving me this award. Thank you, Brian. And it was for the 8-volume History of the Church, History of Joseph Smith and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, my 8-volume series, and he was president. So I have an award over here. You know, you can't see it, but it has his signature on it as president of the John Whitmer Historical Association for that year. I think it's 2018. Or 2018. I think it was. Can't remember. Okay, next slide.
I see you dressed for the occasion.
Yes. I forgot my RFM suit.
Yes.
Yes.
Dress for success.
Yeah, you gotta look successful. Anyway.
Okay.
So here is the first paragraph, and you see the 2 stars, and Joseph Smith and his followers portrayed as caricatures. So
right, and by the way, before you get
we'll
to talking
talk about that a little bit later. Yeah.
This would be a great time since you pointed out the 2 stars of the 5 stars. We have a wonderful Trexmo meme made by Rebecca Biblioteca, specifically for tonight's show. And drumroll, please. It's beaming onto the bridge at present. I think we're having trouble locking on to the...
I'm really sorry. Let me try to take it off and put it back on. There we go.
There it is.
It's really
okay,
small,
so
I can make it bigger.
Rebecca
a little bigger.
Rebecca Biblioteca.
Here it is. Here it is.
Go ahead,
We've got Spock talking to Kirk on the bridge. Below we have on the screen, the view screen, we've got the 2 stars out of the 5 stars. We've got Spock saying to Captain Kirk, "This star system was named after Brian Hales, Captain."
This is the 2-star system.
Because there's 2 out of 5. Yeah, and I thought maybe, let me see if I can find this. Yes, we could have had, I don't mean to one-up Rebecca, so I probably shouldn't say this, but it did occur to me that this star system, or this comet actually, was named after Brian Hale Bop, Captain.
Yeah, the Hales Bop.
But it's got to be a star system because there's 2 out of 5, so never mind. Or Haley Bop.
Yeah.
Don't let it pass you by.
Applewhite, right? Mr. Applewhite in the Heaven's Gate crew.
Very good. Yes. Yeah. And most of them made it just in time as the comet was leaving the station.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the fun for tonight. Everything else is going to be dead serious.
Okay. All right. So this is the first paragraph. The theory promoted throughout Charisma Under Pressure, describing Joseph Smith as a pious fraud, fails to accommodate the historical Joseph Smith in 2 important ways. Okay, so first, the date is the 12th of July, 2023, right?
Yes.
On there. And so I received an email on 27th of July, a few weeks after that, after he wrote his review. And I hadn't seen it actually because I wasn't looking. And then I discovered it just around the 27th of July. So on the 30th of July, when I posted my Facebook post responding to Hales, on the 30th of July, I received an email from someone who asked Brian if he had read my book before posting his review.
Yes.
And his answer was, "I'm still reading it."
I'm still reading it?
Yeah. He says, actually, listening to it while I go out running in the morning. Okay. So
it's an audio book.
Into consideration.
Actually, he's wealthy enough to have Don Bradley pedaling along beside him and reading out loud.
I think that's happened once or twice.
So he hasn't even read your book, nor has he listened to it completely.
He doesn't need to. He knows the pious fraud thesis, and that just makes him, want to puke probably.
Yeah,
but,
it makes him itchy.
Although the pious fraud thesis, actually, I'll bring this up later again, but is the most charitable view a non-believer could have towards Joseph Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
This is my version. Bill will appreciate this. This is my version of still manning Joseph Smith.
Okay.
It makes sure I give him the best possible outcome. Even though it's very troubling anyway.
I've got a feeling that when you see pious fraud, you're seeing the word pious, and he's seeing the word fraud.
So I get hit on both from traffic coming both ways, and so. Yeah, it's like, what do you mean Joseph is pious? And the other side says, what do you mean he's a fraud?
And hence the 2-star review. Easy to make enemies.
It's a very subtle, nuanced position that I think Brian should become more acquainted with and have more of a balanced approach to it. So, because it seems like the only view he wants you to take is that, well, Joseph Smith couldn't have written the Book of Mormon, so it all has to be true, and the whole world's going to be converted. And if you're not converted, there's something wrong with you. So, you're being dishonest. You're being dishonest. You can't see the miracle. You're just denying it. Whatever.
I think all three of us were converted at one point, so there's nothing wrong with us.
Yeah. At what point did I become biased? When I was in, at what point did it's the evidence that led me to this position. So at what point did I become biased? Because I was a believer,
Mm-hmm.
You
weren't biased then. You became biased later.
Yeah. They have like a circular definition. How do you know I'm biased? Well, you don't believe it.
Yeah. Right. Because it's so obvious. And do you want to say anything more about pious fraud? Because I'm really anxious to get into the number game, or Brian Hales by the numbers. Because it's so obvious that Joseph Smith could not have written this book because numbers.
To some people.
Yeah.
So, no, we'll move on. Everybody's probably familiar with pious fraud. Let's see. I think where he said that it was there were caricatures on that last paragraph. I think the opposite's true. Hale's portrayal of Joseph Smith as too dumb to dictate something like the Book of Mormon, and Joseph Smith's followers are too smart to be fooled. Those are caricatures.
Interesting.
Okay.
Well put. So,
actually, the theory promoted throughout, when he says throughout the book, is sociologist Max Weber's analysis of various kinds of authority, especially charisma, and the inevitable institutionalization of charisma in order to balance it and keep it together. Does Hales discuss this in his review? No, he doesn't discuss this. That's one of the major theses that I cover in the book. Mm-hmm. So, and his review didn't do that. And a word on methodology. Okay, a word on methodology. I do discuss pious fraud in the introduction within a much larger nuanced discussion that Hales evidently didn't understand or appreciate. My approach assumes that the Book of Mormon isn't historical. So I'm assuming that it's not historical, which is a legitimate conclusion a scholar can make, because that can be tested. The result of this conclusion necessarily means there were no plates or Nephite or a Nephite angel. Pious fraud is the most charitable view, like I was saying before, one can take of Joseph Smith's motives, yet Hales is intolerant of even this. In my introduction, I clearly state that scholarship can't decide if the Book of Mormon is inspired or not, or whether Joseph Smith's a prophet or not. That is a conclusion religious people make based on faith. On the other hand, Hales' approach to the Book of Mormon is to bracket the question of historicity. Okay. And instead, he endeavors to prove that it is a miracle beyond not only Joseph Smith's ability, but anyone's, which is purely a subjective judgment, although he uses numbers to create the appearance of objective scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
But the point here is that Hales and I are doing completely different things. And that Hales is attempting to prove a miracle and force us to believe it, which is what proselytizing apologists do.
Right. Historians tend to bracket miracles because history can't prove or disprove miracles, right?
Right. But we can test the Book of Mormon's historicity. I mean, that is within the realm of scholarship.
Right. But it struck
And
me
we
that
do
what
it
you
all
said
the
about
time.
Brian Hales is that he's doing the opposite. Instead of being, as a historian would do, bracketing miracles, what he does is he brackets history in order to prove
Yeah.
a miracle.
So he wants to take off the table the very thing that led us to our conclusion. You know, so he can make it look like a miracle. Well, if we can show that the Book of Mormon's not history, it could still be, you know, you might want to consider a revelation or something, but it's still, you have to include Joseph Smith in the process somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And like Bill likes to say a lot is you can't, a pious fraud and a plain old fraud are indistinguishable. That's why I'm being charitable.
Yeah, they're still frauds. Exactly.
So you, if you want to have faith and believe the Book of Mormon is inspired and Joseph Smith is a prophet, fine. I don't have anything to say about that. I can't say anything about that. That's not scholarship. Scholarship has nothing to do with that. But I can say the Book of Mormon is not history, and that's why I don't believe it. You know, but he's trying to force us into a miracle, which we can't do. You know, so our hands are tied.
He uses a lot of numbers. He's gone from being an anesthesiologist to an accountant. He's a bean counter.
Well,
This is the bean counter argument, isn't it?
Yeah. Right. Counting the numbers, and you know, can the bean counter become a general authority one day? Okay, so now paragraph 2. Yeah, that's first. It fails to account for Joseph Smith's creation of the Book of Mormon, which is covered in my first book. Charisma does not bestow the composition and oratory skills needed to create. You know, we went through this 269,320 word book with 207. Although you remember, RFM just read that, so I won't bother going through it. But these 8 enumerations actually come from Hales' 2021 fair presentation called "Mind the Gap." The substance
Mind the gap. The gap between Joseph Smith's education and the brilliance of the man or woman or person that must have been required to author the Book of Mormon. That's what he means by that, right? You know, it strikes me that
we're going to look at that really closely.
It strikes. I feel like I'm channeling Daniel C. Peterson all of a sudden, because when he talks about 269,320 word book, the spirit of Daniel C. Peterson is telling me that any book is made up of words, and if we counted the words, there would be a certain number of words in every book.
Yeah, we're going to.
And I'm not exactly sure what is so significant about this particular number of words in this particular book.
He wants to name every fact about the book without what I'm going to talk about the different categories in his scheme of numbers here. Some of them just are irrelevant. But so the substance of which this presentation at Fair, the substance of which he has repeated on Facebook and several interviews all over the place. So if we go to the next slide. So here he is giving his presentation. And it came with this like handout. It has 2 sides, but the first side is the one mostly he dwells on in this review. And you can see this that one, there's several panels. There's a top panel, talks about the gap, and then below that is the Book of Mormon is complex, and he lists all these complexities, and we'll talk about those. And there's 32 of those actually, not 8. So, but he's drawing from this. Then over here is Joseph Smith's composition skills in 1829. And then below that is Joseph Smith's oratory skills in 1829. And he cites these sources, and his objective is to show that there's a big gap between the Book of Mormon, which is this hugely complex literary book, and then Joseph Smith's abilities, which are so puny, as you can see in that one panel, so puny, he can never have matched the task. Okay,
Right.
so
This is really getting back in a different way, just by numbers mainly, but getting back to a very old trope in Mormon apologetics, isn't it?
what's that?
That we make Joseph Smith as dumb as possible in order to make
yeah.
the Book of Mormon as miraculous as possible.
Joseph Smith played along with that, of course, because he was the unlearned in opposition to Anton,
Right.
which was the learned. And he couldn't read the characters that he looked at, and Joseph could, with the gift of God, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So he played that unlearnedness up himself. But as we're going to see, it doesn't. It's an apologetic. There's a lot of apologetics that are still alive now. Were started in the first year, like Urim and Thummim.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the next slide.
And I just want to say too,
Please.
and maybe we get into it, but the composition skills of Joseph Smith, I just want to note for the listeners and the viewers, do we have any firsthand sources of scribes who acknowledge that Joseph Smith used the King James version of the Bible that his family had to do major parts of the Book of Mormon, which we know which version of the KJV was used?
Yes.
But we don't have any scribes that report that Joseph Smith used it. Do we have any scribes that reported that Joseph Smith used the Adam Clarke's commentary for the King James version restoration or translation? No. Do we have any scribes who report him using the New Testament to insert pieces of, say, Matthew and Luke into the Book of Moses, or inserting Paul into Moroni? No. And so the moment you recognize how many times Joseph uses outside sources that we don't get any record of, you open up a door, and a significant one, to there are maybe other sources that Joseph Smith was able to use that nobody reports on. And Joseph Smith's composition skills don't matter in this equation because he's a dictator. He's dictating the Book of Mormon.
Well, you're on to the answer there.
Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Hales is comparing apples to oranges. But on the dictation thing, the witnesses in the latter part of the 19th century said that he put the stone in the hat and dictated the Book of Mormon, and they were trying to answer a completely different question than we are asking, and that was, did he have a manuscript like Solomon Spaulding's manuscript? Was he dictating from behind a curtain? Could he had this manuscript? And no, he was out in the open, and he had no manuscript he was reading from. Now, if he had taken out the Bible like he did for the inspired revision and made marks in it and said, here, just copy this, or I'm just going to read this to you, it'd be faster, right? Nobody would think that was cheating, right? Or that he's plagiarizing. He's just going, and he makes a few corrections as he goes along, as he's dictating these 20 chapters of Isaiah into the Book of Mormon. But nobody would think to mention that, because that's not Solomon Spaulding's manuscript. That's not a source. Everybody knows the Bible is in, 1st and 2nd Nephi. So there's no sense in talking about that. Anyway, so there is that. So we know he took the head out of the hat at some point. And like any psychic, RFM will appreciate this. Like any psychic, they always have excuses for things that they're doing, and they're having trouble or this or that. And they can stop. And Joseph Smith was in total control. He can stop and start whenever he wanted. And the average number of pages to be translated is very few. In the first edition, it's about 8 pages, I calculated, per day. And that's at a conservative 60 days of dictation. We'll talk about other numbers that get closer to the truth a little bit later. But so it's very doable. It's only about 3 hours of work per day on average. But he can stop and start whenever he wanted. And
They can take breaks to go and skip stones down by the river for the
Yeah.
first 116 pages, or he can have some kind of argument with Emma where he needs to stop because it's not coming. The divine emanations are not coming because his heart is not right with God, and he has to go out and repent in the orchard. There's all sorts of ways for him to stop, go out, take a break, and then come back later that day or maybe even the next day and commence translating again.
Right.
And we're talking
I
about the
believe-
time issue right now, right? The time, the amount of time to translate. And once if you're not a believer in the literalness of Mormonism, then having Joseph need more time to come back and have Moroni visit every year at the Hill Cumorah doesn't make any sense.
No.
And the only secular explanation of that is that Joseph Smith was more than happy to go sooner, but that something was holding him back from being able to go sooner. And that means he didn't have something done to be able to pull over the trick. And so the moment you assume Mormonism isn't true, Joseph Smith gets from 1823 until the publication, till the manuscript goes to the print shop to work out any details, right?
Yeah. So he's had a lot of time thinking, but I believe his epistemology or his method at the time was to think it out in your mind and then pray if it's right and get spiritual confirmation, a burning in the bosom. I think that was his. So he worked it out in his mind. And if he told Oliver Cowdery, I'm working it out in my mind, and that's what he did. It's Emma that says that he would keep on going without stopping for hours. And that was the lost 116 pages, though. So we
Can I
don't
ask you a
have that
question,
to see how
Dan?
good that is. Yeah.
When you wrote this book, which I'm laboring to try and pull over here without knocking everything else off the desk.
Yeah.
When you wrote this book, Charisma Under Pressure, would it be fair to say that you worked it out in your mind?
Yeah, of course. It's every writer does that. It's not saying anything all that great. And even though we don't have a burning in the bosom, everybody works out problems until they feel that it's right, you know? And then they learn that they were wrong later. But so that does happen, you know. So but everybody, that's how I work my life, is to think about it, contemplate about it until I feel good about the answer, you know. And it's not just like everybody else. It's usually a choice between two bad things, but you pick the lesser of the two evils. But so Joseph Smith, in his describing the writing process, is just it's kind of spiritualizing what everybody does anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Anyway, so okay, so we have this graph at the top. That gap.
That one?
Yeah. So this is required to dictate a long, complex book, and there's composition skills, oratory skills, and then here's Joseph Smith. His composition skills are very low because he didn't have very much education. Okay, his oratory skills weren't all that great because he wasn't a great public speaker like Sidney Rigdon. These are apples to oranges. First of all, the first one, composition skills. The Book of Mormon does not require composition skills. He dictated it. It's an oral dictation, and it doesn't require literary skills. Hales compares Joseph Smith to J.P. Rowling,
J.K.
J.K. Rowling, J.R.R. Tolkien, you know, Hawthorne. I can't remember who else, but these are the wrong people to compare Joseph Smith to.
By the way, Dan, does he compare Joseph Smith to Patience Worth anywhere?
Oh, for the automatic writing?
No, he doesn't talk about that at all here, does he? In
Not
fact, he
here.
avoids it.
But he does get into talking about automatic writing and tries to make a distinction without a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And
we did an episode on that one.
Yeah, right. So I won't be dealing with that kind of here. I do bring it. Remember Scott Dunn? I published Scott Dunn's article on automatic writing, and I don't think Joseph Smith did it like they did it. He did it differently,
Mm-hmm.
but they should stand as a caution to saying, oh, Joseph Smith couldn't do anything like that, because there's other people that did it. Even if Joseph Smith did it better than them, it's a close enough approximation to what he did.
Yes.
How do you measure the lines on this graph? Like, how do we know the composition skills required is 5 bars and the composition skills held
I don't know.
What? That doesn't seem, Maven made note that it was a qualitative versus a quantitative, and you can see how that he makes the discrepancy work in his favor here.
So when you actually look at the Book of Mormon, if it were a literary work, you wouldn't have all the bad grammar in it and all the overly wordiness to it. So it's not a literary work. So why are you putting the Book of Mormon in this camp of composition skills? It doesn't require composition skills. It requires exactly what Joseph Smith had. Poor grammar. He was kind of a charismatic, unpolished speaker that had a lot of pull with people. Some people that heard him couldn't resist his charisma. So then you have oratory skills. Well, he's dictating it. It doesn't require great oratory. Okay, the comparison doesn't make any sense. Why is he doing that? I don't know. But he's trying to make the Book of Mormon look way better than it is, and Joseph Smith look dumber, and he's talking about skills that Joseph Smith didn't need. He didn't need composition skills to write the Book of Mormon. And he didn't need oratory skills.
I think he needed 3 things. He didn't really need a lot of education. He needed the ability to tell stories.
Yeah.
He needed an understanding of the general coming forth and the history of the American Indians that was prevalent in his community. And he needed a familiarity with the Bible.
Yeah.
And I think that pretty much covers it.
Well, when you look at the rest of his career, he keeps on going in this fashion. So he has ability, and we'll get into that in some other slides.
Can I ask you a question, Dan?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I know we got a lot of slides to get through, but I want to ask this question because in and around the time of 1829, when Joseph Smith is dictating the Book of Mormon as we have it today with Oliver Cowdery as a scribe primarily, that's not the only thing he's doing. He's also receiving revelations from God. Before the composition of the Book of Mormon, during the composition of the Book of Mormon, and after the Book of Mormon was composed, even in 1829 and 1830. So in other words, we have a rather large sample of Joseph Smith being able to dictate things that we understand that Brian Hales and other faithful members would say it's coming from God. But still, that would seem to me something that we should be able to put on the table for purposes of comparison of Joseph Smith's ability to dictate things in and around the same time as he's dictating the Book of Mormon. Did Brian Hales do that?
Did he do what?
Make that comparison.
With the revelations?
Yes.
No, like you said, he wants to take those off the table. But I'll argue later that you can't.
Okay, very good.
So Hales misrepresents the Book of Mormon. A careful examination of the Book of Mormon shows that it was dictated, not written, by someone with intelligence, a limited storytelling ability, steeped in Bible culture, more comfortable with speaking than writing, but not an orator who used poor grammar, had limited education, and not terribly sophisticated. Sound like anyone you know?
It sounds like Joseph Smith, because I've actually read the first edition of the Book of Mormon, and that's what it looks like.
Yeah, you read the Book of Mormon, this is what comes out. The type of person that wrote the Book of Mormon, if you look at it honestly, this is the kind of person you need and to write it, because it's not going to be a highly literary person. I mean, we had a highly literary person read it, like Mark Twain, and he said it was chloroform in print. It's not literature. You're in the wrong genre. The genre it should be compared to is pseudepigrapha. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I maintain that the closer one looks at the Book of Mormon, and the more you know about the historical Joseph Smith, the real one, the smaller the gap becomes, but Hales' job is to make that gap as wide as possible. Okay, next slide. This is his other panel. I had to divide it so that you could read it. So the Book of Mormon is a complex book. We have, so what we were talking about before was, I believe, a conceptual problem to Hales' thesis. That if he tried to present this to a peer review board, this is what a conceptual thesis, this is what the first thing they would notice with his thesis. Now, the second thing is this, another conceptual problem. Not all these numbers are about complexity. Okay, next slide. Okay, not that one.
I think the next slide was the one with the pink highlighting.
Yeah, that's it. That's what we need. So these items, word count, number of sentences, average sentence length, reading level, 8th grade, right?
How is having a really long sentence a sign of literary skill? Having
it's
an
not,
average,
it's not.
Average sentence length of 39.3 words. My English teacher would have killed me.
You got it, Bill. That's exactly right. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
So, and you'll see in the next graph that exactly that being portrayed. Unique words, that is the total vocabulary of the book, is 5,903 words. Then he says it's college level vocabulary words that aren't in the Bible. There's dozens of college level. Now, how he determines it's college level is by today's standards. And so what the problem he runs into, another conceptual problem he runs into, is words that were not obsolete to us were common in the 19th century. They spoke them all the time. But now you need a college education to be probably familiar with some of these words, you know, because we don't use them anymore. And that's what he's doing. And there's a built-in contradiction here. So the number of sentences contrasted with punctuation, none.
Right. That was interesting. Number of sentences, 6,852 sentences in the Book of Mormon, but under punctuation, there's none. That sounds like one sentence to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one sentence.
It's the world's longest run-on sentence.
Yeah, a reading level, 8th grade, but you still have to have a college level vocabulary.
That's a contradiction too, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think this is kind of sloppy.
And Dan, can I ask you a question?
Work.
Is he saying, because we're just talking about vocabulary, English words, right? And there's some that have been, I don't know, arbitrarily assigned to college level. It's not like you have to go to college to learn certain words. You can actually learn them without going to college.
You can.
But yeah, if you've got these college level
he used
words,
he used some measurements that are used commonly. He didn't make it up. These are measurements that he plugged these words in and found out what level the vocabulary is on some of these dozens of words.
And you're just going to have a percentage.
Considered nowadays. It's considered nowadays by whoever.
And you're not going to have 100% on any of them. In other words, these words are only known by college kids.
But you only have to have an 8th grade read at an 8th grade level. So
here's what I'm asking. The English words that he says are college.
List.
I'm sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
Well, these do not belong in the list because he's trying to prove the book is complex. These don't do that.
Okay.
Okay.
He's saying that certain English words in the Book of Mormon are college level. So what is he trying to say? That Joseph Smith didn't know these English words and that new English words were being revealed to him on the stone that he then dictates without knowing what they mean?
That's right. The implication of all this is that he's just reading off of the stone, words that he doesn't know. He has to spell out some words. And so
college English words that he doesn't know,
or whatever. It was proper nouns that we know about that Emma mentioned.
In fact, they make it in the book says he knew them.
Yeah. So does Brian believe in a tight translation, even worse than tight. It's a purely mechanical reading off of the stone? Or does he believe in a loose translation, like most apologists, except maybe Royal Skousen, most apologists believe, because they're trying to answer all the bad language and anachronisms, the New Testament anachronisms, or literary and historical anachronisms. They have to go with Joseph Smith participating more in the translation process. And the more he participates in the translation process, the weaker Hales' evidence becomes. How can you argue Joseph Smith's this illiterate guy, and at the same time argue that he's loosely translating this into the best language he can command?
I think I can guarantee you that Brian Hales is going to do what all reputable apologists do, and that is that the Book of Mormon is tightly translated when it helps the apologist for it to be tightly translated, like in a lot of these apparent arguments, even though it's a list of statistics, really. And that the Book of Mormon is loosely translated when the apologist needs for it to be loosely translated.
Right.
Yeah. That's the game.
Yeah, so we have a few conceptual problems with his thesis, and he needs to rethink this a little bit, I think. He's writing a book now on this, so I hope I can help. The next slide.
I expect he'll be reaching out to you.
So we have a complex book, sentence length. Now, so here's the Book of Mormon, 39.3% is words per sentence.
Is that 39.3 words per sentence average?
Yes.
Yeah.
Almost 40
and then
words?
Look at all the rest, these other books. Tale of Two Cities, The Hobbit. No, why are all these sentences so short? Are they dumber than the Book of Mormon? Whoever wrote the Book of Mormon? God, or, Moroni, Nephi, they must have been pretty smart. But no, it's just, there's a reason why these guys aren't writing long sentences. It's not like they didn't know how. Unless you're German, if you're German, you write really long sentences, with the verb at the end. And so you have to really listen. But so there's a reason why these sentences are so long. And the same sentences you will find in Joseph Smith's normal writing. The same type of sentence length, like the 1832 history where he's writing.
And why is that?
It's a one run-on sentence.
Is it because he has difficulty coming to the point?
Well, because when you're speaking orally instead of writing, because the Book of Mormon is an oral book, right? It's an oral performance, like Bill Davis says, it's an oral performance, and it's oral, and you use a lot of conjunctions, and you just keep going. There's no punctuation really when you're speaking, right? So that's why these sentences turn out to be so long, and why there's so much digression, and why the whole Book of Mormon is so wordy, unnecessarily wordy and redundant, because it's an oral presentation. It's not written. Somebody that was composing wouldn't have this type of book. So that's what I'm arguing, is that the Book of Mormon is exactly what you would expect Joseph Smith to produce orally.
So
okay,
you're the exact opposite mirror image of what Brian Hales is arguing.
Yeah, right. Because this is an area where I think we do need to study more is Joseph Smith's language. There's some barriers to doing a really good job of it, because we lack certain kinds of sources we need, but we still have to do it. And some even Mormon scholars have started to do this kind of study of intertextuality. So here we have the Book of Mormon is a complex book. This is another category, what I call non-evidence. Okay, dialect, early English.
That's the sign of it being a complex book.
Dan,
yeah.
Is that the Ghost Committee at work, the early English?
Yes. That's where it uses grammar forms that date way back to before the King James Version. And basically, I think the best, I mean, it leads to like crazy conclusions, but if you believe that's true, but it's because it's an oral book, because you can't go on Google and Google some of these sentence structures and try to find them, because people wrote differently than they spoke. Okay. And you still have people like the Quakers who speak the, kind of these and thous type things. Even in the 19th century, they were speaking that way.
Nothing is better for thee than me.
Yeah. So you have that. You still have dialect. Jonathan Edwards is from the 19th century, and you can find some of those early English things that Skousen tries to show, and Carmack tried to show in Jonathan Edwards' writings. These things show up there because, like in the 17th century, the 18th, 17th, and 17th century kind of overlapping. And so you still have people, Joseph Smith's father, born in 1772, and you have him, and you have Azel Smith, born before that. I don't know his birth date, but before that, he still has contact with people that grew up in the time period, okay, or still spoke that kind of language, that kind of type of word structure, okay. And there's only a few things, and they're making a big theory out of nothing, in my opinion. So the early English dialect, parallel phraseology like chiasmus, parallel phraseology like alternates, that's like going A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, in structure, poetic structure, poetic literary forms. So there's other kinds like anaphora, epistrophe, these kinds of, chiasmus is just one rhetorical repetition technique among many others that all appear in the Book of Mormon, appear in Joseph Smith's writings, appear in Joseph Smith's revelations. They appear everywhere because they are taught in books of rhetoric. Chiasmus is taught in books of rhetoric to ministers. And even in schools, there's rhetorical books that include chiasmus lessons, little short chiasms, reverse parallelism. They appear in those kind of books, but under a different name that nobody looks under. And it's anti-metaboly. Okay. So anti-metaboly, like it's aura and all these epistrophe, like I mentioned. Anti-metaboly is a reverse parallelism, and they'll give examples in some of these books. They'll give examples out of the Bible of this reverse parallelism, and they'll give some out of English literature. So it wasn't unknown to Joseph Smith, to ministers, and ministers learned rhetoric as part of their training, especially in the New England type ministers who were very formal and all that. But they learned these. Hales refers to it as poetic, but it's really rhetorical repetition. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject.
I just mentioned something in passing. It only occurred to me recently that every single one of my podcasts, virtually every one, I do to a majority of the extent extemporaneously. I'll have some notes. I might read a few things.
That's pretty good. It's better than I can do.
Well, it takes a lot of editing afterward, but it's extemporaneous. And so often I've gotten comments from people, on the one hand saying, why do you repeat yourself so much? And other people saying, because it helps get the point across. But regardless of your opinion about it, the fact is that what I do is I kind of, here's the point, and I'll talk about the point, and then I'll come back to the point again, and then I'll talk about that, and then in another way, and I'll come back to the point. That's where the repetition comes from, because they keep coming back to the point after talking about other things. And it only occurred to me that if this were written down, if somebody did a transcript of one of these podcasts, then it wouldn't take too much ability to be able to go back and look at these patterns and ascribe them to ancient Hebrew authors.
Yeah. Well, Wesley Walters, he was a Presbyterian minister, and he preached, and he said that it's a natural form you get into, is if you have several elements to discuss, and when you reach the end and you want to emphasize, there's only two ways to go: to repeat them in the same order or reverse order. And so chiasmus is a huge subject that I could talk about for hours, but Hales lists 367. There aren't 367 chiasms in the Book of Mormon. I have a book where some Mormon researcher had thousands, and he was seeing chiasmus like everywhere. And when the tighter the chiasm, the tighter, and the elements are tight, the more evidence you have of intentionality.
Right.
But the looser and the wider it gets, more spread out, it becomes more of the ingenuity of the researcher. It's a danger that they are seeing things in it. When they start editing things out, and then John Welsh, it got so out of hand, like this guy had thousands, it got so out of hand, John Welsh, or Jack Welsh, however you want to call him, he made some criteria for chiasmus, and what one of them's like, let's say, an imbalance, where one of the elements on the opposite side is so much smaller or so much bigger than the other one. It's so imbalanced, right? And he thought that would be a criticism that would make it less likely. And most of these 367 examples fall into this and other kinds of imbalance. The word isn't exactly the same. It takes a little bit of imagination to make the two elements the same, because it's not like a synonym all the time. It's an antonym or some other kind of loose connection. So there's a lot of room for what I would call mental pareidolia. Okay, pareidolia is like when you look at the clouds and see shapes and things, or you look at the toast and you see Jesus's face on it or something, a burnt toast, and you can do that mentally too, where you start connecting things. And the brain humans are pattern making machines.
Yes. And the problem with these kind of lists, from my point of view, is that the person who's making it, which is Brian Hales, is obviously motivated to make these numbers as big as possible.
Yeah, right. So there's no evidence that he is being balanced in his approach.
Right. Hey, Dan, this is really, really fascinating. Okay. I love this. I love what you're going to say tonight. I just want to draw your attention to that old clock on the wall, which has us at 1 hour and 7 minutes into tonight's show. I'll take responsibility for the first 7 minutes before we got you on. But I want to make sure we get to everything is what I'm
all right. Thank you for the reminder. So these, I would say if you include Joseph Smith in the process, you got to take these off. They somewhat have to do with complexity, but as you see, it's more there because of Joseph Smith. It's a reflection of Joseph Smith's abilities. And we'll talk about that. So
right, and now I'm going to interrupt you again, and I apologize and say not only is he motivated to come up with the biggest numbers in each of the categories, he's also motivated to come up with the biggest number of categories.
Yeah, right. 32. So here, next slide. Okay, so this is where Joseph Smith's composition skills in 1829 and oratory skills in 1829. 1829 is kind of an artificial restriction. These are actual red herrings too, because as I mentioned before, the Book of Mormon doesn't require these things. And Joseph Smith, we know already that Joseph Smith wasn't literary, and neither is the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith's not oratory, and neither is the Book of Mormon. So these are red herrings. The 1829 restriction is irrelevant since the Book of Mormon doesn't require composition or oratory skills, proving that Joseph Smith wasn't formally educated or wasn't a great public speaker is irrelevant. And the elements, when you go through it, that's basically what he's trying to do, is to prove that Joseph Smith wasn't literary. He was poorly educated, had little education, and he had bad grammar. So next slide. Okay, so this is the second paragraph. So charisma does not bestow the composition and oratory skills needed to create the Book of Mormon. As already discussed, Hales' wording here is misleading, indeed a red herring, since the Book of Mormon is a result of dictation, which is different than writing or composition or public speaking. If education and literary composition skills were necessary to write the Book of Mormon, we wouldn't have the bad grammar and thousands of corrections later. Charisma is closely associated with the power of persuasion and a certain command of the language, I believe, is necessary for Joseph Smith to have accomplished what he did. I believe the historical record shows Joseph Smith was charismatically qualified leader. So next. So here we are, Joseph Smith's oratory skills. As a Methodist exhorter in his youth, he well understood the principle of speaking extemporaneously. Methodists didn't believe in reading their sermons like, Presbyterians and Congregationalists. He continued his life. He didn't have prepared texts, except on one occasion. Guess what that is? When he read the dedicatory prayer in the Kirtland Temple, for which he received criticism.
For reading it?
Yeah.
Oh.
So he wasn't regarded as a great orator like Sidney Rigdon, but that's not what we find in the Book of Mormon anyway. Instead, he had what someone visiting Nauvoo described as rough eloquence that held audiences spellbound. So here we have a couple of quotes. The first one's a non-Mormon, Edwin de Leon. The prophet spoke very fluently, but ungrammatically, like an uneducated man, but he possessed the gift of a rough eloquence and could be most persuasive when he tried. The next one is Wandel Mace, a Mormon. Joseph Smith was very interesting and eloquent in speech. So Hales doesn't quote these in his thing, of course.
Well, they're not 1829.
Right. So if he wants to argue with me, he has to show me what event changed Joseph Smith into becoming not polished but yet eloquent, just like And now, if he showed me that Joseph Smith all of a sudden acquired literacy to the point where he could give an oration like Senior Rigdon, that'd be one thing. But he never could, never. But so these people are describing some guy that he didn't acquire anything along the way that Hales can point to change what he was in 1829 to what he was when these people are listening to him. Some of these people are describing very early acquaintance with him. Others are later. Howard Corey. I sat and listened to his preaching at the stand in Nauvoo a great many times when I have been completely carried away with his indescribable eloquence, power, and of expression.
Hey, Dan?
I think he froze up there.
Yeah. You froze up there, Dan. Don't know if you can hear me right now, but we're waiting for things to clear up in Ohio. Okay, I'll complete that sentence from Howard Corey while we're waiting for Dan. I sat and listened to his, Joseph Smith's, preaching at the stand in Nauvoo a great many times when I have been completely carried away with his indescribable eloquence, power of expression, speaking as I have never heard any other man speak.
You look at those three quotes. I mean, again, LDS believers and apologists trump out the same quotes all the time that show Joseph Smith to be inadequate at speaking. But there are other quotes, as we're seeing here, for instance, that offer a different view, and almost never do the apologists point to these ones.
Well, right. And of course, it does depend. They're very good at categorizing quotes. When they're talking about how dumb Joseph Smith was in order to play up the marvel of the Book of Mormon, Then you get a certain set of quotes like Brian Hales had in his handout that was up there earlier on the screen in a slide. When they're talking about Joseph Smith's eloquence and the power of his speaking and how the Spirit bore witness to people through the gift that he had from God, then you get quotes like this. But I do think it's important to take them all together so that we can have a more fully developed picture of Joseph Smith, as opposed to the caricature of Joseph Smith that Brian Hales has created, even though he accuses Dan Vogel of creating a caricature of Joseph Smith himself.
Yeah, we should probably, before Dan gets back, we should probably skip to like slide 40. What do you think?
That'd be great. I tell you what, why don't we ditch him so that when he comes back, we aren't even here. Okay, everybody?
There we go. We'll just end the show, folks.
Let's go let's go hide in different rooms and behind furniture. Turn
At this
off the
point,
lights,
I'm
and when he comes
having-
back, we'll jump out and say surprise.
There you go. I like it. At this point, I'm worried that his whole computer shut down, which is what I think may have happened with the length of time this is taking. But, when we go back, I don't want to necessarily go through all these, but
You know what we need? We need
what's
Maven.
that? Yeah, Maven.
Can we sum it up, Maven?
I'm glad you thought so, because I just thought I would like to share some things. I don't know if I can get them pulled up here now, but I'm going to try. So Mike from LDS Discussions came in. So I hope Dan will see this later, but he says that he's worked with Amazon for over 20 years. So he says he's got some advice. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and put him on the screen too. So number one, he says it's clear that Brian bought the book so that his review would carry more weight, given that he hasn't even read it yet. Verified purchases get weighted heavier than non-verified purchases do. And he's talking about the review system there. Okay. Number two, Amazon always highlights the quote-unquote most helpful positive and negative review. Hales would know what a great chance that is to promote himself as the lone negative review, which leaves him at the top. Number three, typically the creator of a product can reply to reviews. So he says, I don't know if Dan can email Amazon to get his reply posted, but he could give that a shot to see if they can add that for him. And then number four, he says, holy frick. So Mike's still in Mormon swear mode, I think. So he says, how clueless is Hales to admit he hasn't even finished reading the book to someone asking about his review? Not that it could get the review removed, but just wanted to add that here. Number five, one possible workaround would be to have a fan write a 2-star review that's critical of the problems of church history. That's just to get up. But anyway, I thought those were really interesting things to put here as well. And it just does show more, I guess, cleverness, I guess, on Brian's part to do what he did, on purpose, I guess.
I'm glad you shared that with us.
And I did
thanks to Mike for putting that up.
Yeah.
This here,
should
when
we go ahead?
To one of the slides here that he showed, you're saying the Book of Mormon's a complex book, but at 8th grade reading level isn't complex. 39.3 words per sentence isn't complex. No punctuation isn't complex. College level vocabulary, again, if the words made it into the book, then Joseph had some sense of what the words were. So I don't think it's fair to give, in the invisible credit for that. Joseph Smith can certainly get credit for that. And we've already gone over his education connected to his brother at Dartmouth. We've talked about how much time Joseph Smith had to prepare. We talked about dictating is completely different than composing an actual written work.
Yeah.
I know, and if you go down on that left column to 3 up
Mike,
from the bottom, he's got Bible intertextuality, hundreds of phrases and integrations from the Bible in the Book of Mormon.
That's called plagiarism.
Well, it certainly makes it complex, but I don't know that that's in a way that Brian Hales really wants to promote.
Yeah. And I think when you start to compare these books to other works, sorry, maybe.
Hey, everybody, I'm going to leave this to you. I'm just going to back out here a second, see if I can call Dan on the phone and
no sweat.
See how that tornado in his neighborhood's doing.
Yeah, let's make sure he's okay. When we compare the Book of Mormon to other books, the Late War, the First Book of Napoleon, I just think these kinds of things become less interesting, and you can see Hales is really trying to kind of pick his spots to make this sound really good, but it's like Jacob Hansen accused me of what's it called, a Gish Gamut, something like that. Gish Gallop.
Gish Gallop.
Yeah, which is just a long list for the sake of having a long list. That's what the hell this is right here. It's just a long list for the sake of having a long list.
I think that's really ironic of Jacob to accuse you of, by the way. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, if you use
And
the
Gish
collective
Galloping
witness
is-
model, then he's right.
Well, Gish Galloping is usually it's spoken. It's talking in debates where you're talking so much you like overpower the other person, or you give like way
Yeah.
too many things to respond to. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what he does. Like in every interview, or that's with someone of an opposing view, he just talks over them, and you really have to interrupt to get to be able to even
I
try
learned
to
the hard
start
way.
responding to things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for Jacob, I didn't know he said that, but that's really funny to me. But I did also want to point out, like, it's give, I guess, a reverse shout out to Mike from LDS Discussions. His podcast on Mormon stories goes into like really deep dives into Joseph Smith and a lot of like Book of Mormon creation type versus loose translation, etc. So that's also a good resource, I think, for the kinds of things we're talking about here. But I think we should go ahead and like keep moving on. Or do you really want to wait for Dan to come back? I mean,
yeah,
he's
I
got.
don't know.
I know he's definitely got his own thing, but some of these things, that we've talked about. Yeah, I don't know. And Radio Free Mormon's not back either. Maybe
Yeah,
we
so-
will have to make this a part 2 after all.
The 200, when you've got names of characters, 207 character names. Again, there are certain authors of books, Lord of the Rings being a great example, where you get an introduction to tons of characters.
So I'm back.
And names of people.
I'm
How are
sorry.
you?
I just jumped right in, so I'm back. Well, I thought I was kidding about storms knocking out his internet, and they are having storms in Ohio, and his internet did get knocked out. And he says sometimes it gets knocked out, it comes right back, and this is the longest it's been, and we've got no ETA on Dan being able to show up. So I told Dan, I said, well, you've got a lot of work into this. There's a lot of material to cover. I felt bad at the hour mark, trying to hurry you through it. And I said, maybe this would be a good thing to have as a 2-part episode. Mm-hmm. And he can come back next week. I know that's your week, Bill, or we can.
Let's do it.
That's okay?
Yep.
Okay, so we'll have Dan Vogel come back next week. He indicated that was worked for him. And hopefully the storms will have passed by then. But
I was just trying to, again, just trying to buy a moment here to smoothly transition to exiting the show. But I think you really have to take all of this data that Brian's making and you have to parse it out. Because I was telling Maven before you came back, Jacob Hansen accused me of doing a Gish Gallop. And really what Brian Hales is doing here is a Gish Gallop. He's just putting things down, whether they actually help his case or hurt his case. Right. And this idea that you'd have to also compare it to other works of literature and maybe ones that are similar to the Book of Mormon, Late War, First Book of Napoleon, and gauge how long those ones are words per sentence, or how many new character names do those books add, and compare it with other books within literature, because J.R. Tolkien writing a book is much different than Heavenly Father, who has all potential at his fingertips to be giving Joseph Smith a book.
Can I tell you something here? Maybe I'll mention it next week, maybe I'll forget, but as long as I'm remembering it now, there was a time 30 years ago when I was studying the Book of Mormon very closely, not just for apologetic purposes, but try and understand what the message was. And I had an idea in mind that I would write a paper analyzing the different sermons in the Book of Mormon, because I felt that each sermon, had a certain complexity. There was a point that was being made, and frequently we would lose that point when we just try and quote verses out of it. So I made a point of going through the Book of Mormon from beginning to end to list the number of sermons that I could use. In other words, that there were in the book. That would be the subject of the paper. That's about how far it got, by the way.
Yeah.
There were 10. There were 10 sermons that I found. So that makes me wonder where it is that Brian is coming up with 63 sermons in the book. Now, maybe I missed one, maybe I missed two, maybe I missed five, but I didn't miss 53 sermons
Right.
in the Book of Mormon. He is padding his figures, he's fudging his numbers, and he's cooking his books of Mormon.
That's a great point, RFM, and that's something that I thought of when I first come across some of these graphs and articles by Brian. Is that I wonder, does he actually have them listed out or written anywhere so that they can be verified? That was something that occurred to me, and I don't know if maybe the audience knows if he's got, when he lists, all of the unique names in the Book of Mormon, etc. To me, a lot of them seem padded, but again, I mean, I guess I can see where off the top of my head, I wouldn't exactly maybe come up with something really accurate. But I would like to see that, I guess is what I'm saying. I would like to see them listed out somewhere for Brian to be able to back all of this stuff up.
What is amazing about the Book of Mormon, and really, I can't explain this, it's that there are so many different places that information seems to be coming from, but as either Anthony Miller or Terrell Givens, one of those two, I think, called it Joseph Smith, an eclectic aggregator.
Eclectic aggregator?
Yeah, eclectic aggregator. And Terrell Givens uses the word bricolage, right?
Right.
And it's this idea of taking all of these different facets of 19th century material and working them into one consistent story. And we know generally a majority of the places where this information is coming from. For instance, Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream, making it in as the dream of the tree of life. Mm-hmm. But in order to acknowledge that incredible feat, which I think is the most incredible feat of the Book of Mormon, is taking all this 19th century material or older material that was available to Joseph Smith and him putting it into one story, is that you'd have to admit that it was 19th century or accessible material in the first place.
Right. And this is where Terrell Givens goes, that the miracle of the Book of Mormon is not that it produces anything new or original or ancient, or exclusively ancient, I should say. The miracle of the Book of Mormon, based upon Terrell Givens' analysis, is the way in which Joseph Smith is inspired to pick and choose elements and ideas and concepts and literature from his own society and cobble them all together like a bricoleur would a piece of bricolage, because that's what bricolage is. You take all these disparate pieces, throw them together, come up with something new. That's his model for the Book of Mormon. And I think he's correct. I just don't see the inspiration in it that Terrell Givens sees.
Yeah. And I could open up the call. I didn't done anything with the call lines, but it seems to make more sense to me to maybe take calls at the end
Absolutely.
of part 2.
Is that okay with you, Maven?
Oh, you want to do it now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
okay.
It's good.
Then I'll open them up.
I mean, we're an hour and a half. We don't have to do 3 hours every Wednesday.
No, not at all. And if you want to put the call number up on the screen, Maven, that'll help me a bunch.
There's 3 6s in there somewhere. I know that.
Yeah.
Right.
Here we go. 662 667 6667. Well, I know we had one chatter actually said that she tried calling already before the lights were even open. So we'll see if she tries again.
You never saw James Raphael's email to me, huh?
I didn't.
He named other lies.
I look forward.
That is the first one. I thought maybe I would try to find it really quick, since we had kind of a snafu here with Dan getting caught into some sort of storm.
That would be. That's really what they want, and I think if you don't, your integrity is totally called into question here. So an honest person would do exactly that. I am curious.
James
I want to know
Raphael.
what
He reminds me of a Three Dog Night song.
Yeah, so let's see here. He says this one actually conveniently involves both of you and works well if you agree on the first bullet below. I called for the first time on episode 98. Yes, that was actually the first time I called. Go and listen back. You forced me into a yes or no answer to your question about Joseph Smith and 14-year-old marriages being right or wrong. And I remember that, by the way. Completely unrelated to and not on topic of the show about properties and stuff. And you both just scolded me for answering it with nuance.
Am I the other one who scolded
What's
him?
that?
Am I the other when he says you both of you?
No, I think Maven's the other one. And then he uses me talking about, let's say, so this world you claim to live in, you become a citizen and governor. I think this is my conversation with Jacob Hansen, and I say we don't live in a binary world. And so by saying we don't live in a binary world in one instance, and then in another instance, pushing somebody into a yes or no answer is me being dishonest. Rather than maybe sometimes things are complex, and sometimes you just need to say yes or no, whether you stand up for child brides or not. Right? Like maybe there's a difference. And
Well, I'm
then
sitting here listening to you
I just-
read what James Raphael wrote, and it sounds to me kind of like the Book of Mormon. I'll bet James Raphael could dictate a Book of Mormon the way he writes. It's so spongy and expansive, and it takes so long for him to get to a point if he ever actually gets to it.
Oh, and you're gonna love his second one. His second one was that we accidentally at one time had somebody's phone number show up on our screen, and I went back and we deleted a section of our show, and it ended up getting rid of the comments for that show. But we accidentally had our call screen up, visible to our audience. So if somebody was calling and wanting to be anonymous, their number showed on the screen for just a brief moment. He says, and I did. After that, I said, I'm really sorry about that, and we will try really hard to never have that happen again. We won't give out anybody's number. Certainly not intentionally. But then when there was a caller that you needed the number for, and you called him personally and did an episode on it about 2 months ago. When I gave you Justin's number, James thinks that makes me a liar, because when I say I won't give the number to the audience, that also means I can't give the number to you. So you can see the absurdity in such a claim. Now, by the way,
He's really trying really hard.
but not really.
So
Not
hard.
really. There are so
Bless
much
his
easier
heart.
ones. Remember, so for instance, I said I would follow the rules of the church and not record my disciplinary court, and it got recorded anyway. And sort of I did, and sort of I didn't, because John Dehlin helped. That is a sort of deception.
Way to throw
That's
John
a
Dehlin under
deception.
the bus.
If James really wanted to pick out lies, that would be a good one, right? But that's not one he picks. They're
you
these
just gave it up.
stupid ones. It's almost like again, no offense, and I don't mean this lightly. I know people struggle. It's almost like there's something off there, because he's nitpicking at things, and they're not really good things to be the examples that one would pick to
Straining at
build their
gnats?
case. Yeah.
At swallowing camels, maybe.
Yeah. So
Nice
there,
New
James
Testament
Raphael.
reference, Maven. Nice New Testament reference.
Oh yeah. So
I do have a
that's
caller
all
if you want him.
Yes, I hope it's James Raphael. Maybe
Yep.
it's
I
Dan
wish
Vogel.
it was, because these are horrible. All right, so I don't have a name here, but we'll take it.
All right.
Caller, you're on the air. What's the name?
Hey, y'all. My name's Eric.
All right, Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm glad I was able to make it in. You know, this argument that Brian Hales makes, it's been made in the church for years. And even when I was a full-in 100% believer, I never gave it much weight. And it's because it's an argument that is aimed at ignorant people. It's an argument that's aimed at a population that by and large doesn't read. And these days, we don't read. Very few people read. Now, I happened to be a nerd as a kid. I happened to read a lot. And it turns out that the fact that a book exists isn't a miracle. The fact that a book has a lot of words isn't a miracle. The fact that a book has a lot of pages isn't a miracle. Now, those types of things are very impressive to ignorant people, and people who haven't had the experience of reading. But to people who have read, particularly people in Joseph Smith's time, the fact that the book existed wasn't very impressive. In fact, if you look at the opposition to the Book of Mormon in his day, or the apologetic responses, there really wasn't a line of reasoning that was, well, look how many pages there are. Look how many words there are. Isn't that impressive? Because people read, they understood that books exist. They understood that people could write books, even in the space of 60 days. Brian Hales knows that he is targeting ignorant people with this nonsense. He's written books. He knows that books aren't miracles. He's peddling this as an intentional tactic to mislead a populace that by and large doesn't read these days.
That's a great point, Eric. He's trying to wow the widow in Parowan.
Just up the road from me.
Exactly. Exactly. And, you know, again, for people who don't read, you know, the fact that Lord of the Rings exists is a miracle. The fact that the works of Shakespeare exist, it's miraculous to them. But people write books all the time. Also, you know, the fact dictation is kind of a lost art. I caught it at the very end of my career as I was writing legal briefs.
Right.
And, I dictated all the time. And when you're just learning it, it's very impressive.
Can you say that word again? I think we just lost you.
Oh, say
Are you there,
sorry.
Eric?
I'm not sure.
You were saying something about
You bet. I was
dictating, and at the beginning it's difficult to learn how to dictate, but once you get the hang of it, you were saying, I think.
Exactly. It's incredibly difficult at the beginning, and I can understand why people would be impressed that this long book could be dictated. But the truth is, once you know how to dictate, once you have some practice at it, it's really quite simple. And doing 8 pages a day, like Joseph Smith was doing, is not an impressive feat. People were doing it in his day all the time.
It also, there's lots of other sacred texts that are long. Bhagavad Gita, for instance, where Brian would self-admit that that's not the Lord's holy sacred canon to bring people to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And yet it is a complex book. It's got lots of words. It's really long. There's lots of pages. I don't think that these arguments really hold water. It really seems like a naive way to approach trying to prove the church is true. It is.
And I think the way that Brian words it, even when he just says, where did all the words come from? I just was astounded when I first heard him say that.
Well, I will tell you, speaking of Shakespeare, like Eric just did, that reminds me of one of my favorite lines in Shakespeare, where Polonius is going up to Hamlet, who's kind of presenting to be a little bit off in the head. And he's in the library because he wants to find out why it is that he's a little bit off in the head. Anyway, he says, Hamlet's reading a book. And Polonius says, "What is it you're reading, my lord?" And Hamlet looks at him and he goes, "Words. Words. Words." So that's an easy Shakespeare quote if you want. Just say words 3 times and you're quoting Hamlet. But yeah, that's what books are made up of. Go. That's what you're reading. You're reading words. And I want to say just a couple of things here if I can, because I may not remember them for next week. Number one is this, is that there has been a steady stream of apologetic attempts to defend the Book of Mormon and Mormonism without having to actually deal with the issues. There was first, I don't know if it was first, but there was Corbridge, Elder Corbridge, the Corbridge maneuver, right? You separate the primary questions from the secondary questions, and the secondary questions are those nasty issues that you don't have to worry about. All you have to do is worry about the primary questions, which have to do with, was Joseph Smith a prophet, and is the Book of Mormon the Word of God? And you pray about it, you get your answer, and that you've taken care of the primary questions, right? You're good to go because you have avoided dealing with the issues. The second one came from my former missionary companion, Elder McKay, who says that even though there's compelling reasons to doubt Mormonism, you need to stare those down and have faith to believe. So you're not dealing with the issues, except to stare them down and ignore them and not be bothered by them and look the other way chastely. Then you get Jacob Hansen, right? Bill, who's come up with his 5-pronged thing.
Yeah,
it's his own model, which is designed to not have to deal with the issues. If you can find a way to prove Mormonism true without dealing with all the issues that indicate strongly that it's not, yeah, that's the brass ring. And now we've got Brian Hales who's doing the same thing. He's trying to mount a defense of the Book of Mormon that intentionally avoids dealing with the issues. So if you throw out a bunch of numbers, you're not dealing with the issues involved. And the issues are legion. So this seems to be a practice that's going on among Book of Mormon and Mormon apologists today. How do we come up with a way to defend the Book of Mormon without dealing with the issues? And this seems to be another in a long line of those. The second thing I was going to say, let me see if I could... Yeah, go ahead. Please speak to that, Maven.
Well, I want you to finish your second thing. Because I'm going to be bringing up something entirely different.
Well, why don't you bring it up? Because my second thing was entirely different, and I'm not sure I remember it right now.
Okay, I'm going to add this to the stream. November is National Novel Writing Month. This has been going on for quite a while, and it's a challenge out there for and anybody can join it. So if this is something that you're interested in, first of all, you've probably already heard of it if that's the case. But if not, there's a whole nonprofit 501c3 dedicated to this. This is the website here. So yeah, it's began in 1999, and look at here. The challenge is to write 50,000 words of a novel in 30 days. So just
each
pointing
year
that
on
out there.
November
This is a
1st,
challenge that people. Yep.
hundreds of thousands of people around the world begin to write, determined to end the month with a first draft. Really, hundreds of thousands. That's a lot of people.
This
might be a little bit of
this
puffery,
is a really
but
popular thing.
they entered
might
this.
be,
They
but this
entered the
is
month as elementary school
unknown.
teachers, mechanics, or stay-at-home parents. They leave novelists, and now you're going to be one of them. Wow! So this is actually happening. I'm guessing that a number of these people succeed in writing 50,000
Yeah.
words of a novel in 30 days.
This has been this. I mean, I've heard of it before, so I mean that's why I knew to look it up just now. But yeah, and it's just not that weird of a thing. This is something people all over regularly take on. So
Wow.
I
That is
bet we've
amazing.
had people in the chat that have done it.
I had never heard of this before.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, this is. I feel every November. I actually don't remember when I first heard of it, but I know I've known about it for at least several years because I do tend to see it. And it might just be how the algorithms work with social media and stuff. But I always start seeing these things pop up around November of people trying this challenge, and I've always thought it was cool, and maybe someday I'll try it. But anyway, yeah, just putting that out there.
And
Do
in
you
the upper
remember-
left-hand corner appears to be a new word. Like Joseph Smith apparently created a bunch of them for the Book of Mormon. It's NaNoWriMo, which is Reformed
Yeah,
Egyptian for
actually
what,
highlighted
Maven?
National Novel Writing Month. Or is it
That's a
Min
bullseye.
on his throne? Yeah. So anyway, that's my contribution.
Okay. RFM, if you remembered, great. If not, I've got Santiago on the phone.
Santiago. Yeah, that'd be great.
Where in the world is Carmen Santiago? You're on Mormonism Live. Hello.
San Diego.
Santiago.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. You're on the show, my
Sorry
friend.
about that. Bill was taking
Good.
poetic license.
Okay. Well,
San
I want
Diego's
to
not amused.
topic, but also wonder if you can,
Go ahead.
if you consider like current events okay to talk about, especially if it's like relevant in some ways.
Well, we'd like to sort of stay on topic with the subject of tonight's show.
Okay. Well, I just asked
I
because
missed
it
the
has to do with
question.
Elder Holland, and it's
About Elder Holland?
it
Go ahead,
just has
San
to do with Elder
Diego.
Holland. Yeah. So is that okay if I ask about that?
What's the
It's kind of
question?
the news.
Yeah, what's the question?
Well, I don't know if you've seen like the report of his wife's death recently. Have you seen that?
Yeah. Sister Holland passed away.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess like for me, capping off all the other things dealt with this year, like getting COVID, being on dialysis, his whole thing with SUU. I was just wondering for you, since it's like so personal, like the relationship between you and him, like, do you feel like any goodwill toward him in any degree at this time in his life? And does it like make you reflect and possibly like regret the conflict that you guys have had with each other, including like the whole Camp and Fire thing?
I think that Elder Holland, you're trying to put me on the spot here where he just lost his wife and you're trying to get me to say something, I guess, catchy, but I'll just say that I found Elder Holland to be very genuine when he was trying to help me with my faith crisis, but he also didn't have answers. And over time, I learned that I was only helpful to him as long as I continued to say the right things. And I found his integrity deeply lacking.
Right. And sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything, but I'm just like,
You did, though. I mean, you called, whatever your reason is, I mean, you called to do that during this show, so I'm just trying to figure what that is.
Well, I want to assure San Diego and the rest of the audience that there's no truth to the rumor that Bill is planning on doing another episode, this one titled Liar, Liar, Shroud on Fire.
No, we won't be doing that. I'll stay far
That
away
would be low. Bill has standards. They may be low, but he has standards.
All right, let's go to another caller. We've got, I think, Zelik on the phone, and this will be our last one for the night. I don't know if that was James Raphael or what, but
there's Dan with his comment saying, yes, Maven, next week. So we'll be seeing Dan Vogel next week. And Dan, I hope you weather the storms in Ohio.
Hello?
Yeah. Give us 1 second. RFM's just talking to Dan Vogel. So one
That
moment.
was actually, it wasn't supposed to be a period, but I decided to end the sentence there anyway.
Okay, so is it Zelik? Hello?
Yeah.
Go ahead. You're on Mormonism Live.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. I just called to say that I wrote, back in the day, I wrote a master's degree. I had 5 kids in tow, and I did it during the summer. But I tapped into a kind of a muse, and I wrote that thing in like no time flat. And I've just looked at the word count. Like I wrote it within like a 2-month summer session, and I'm just looking the word count now. 777,000 words in a summer, and it was like almost written good enough to publish just from this muse. But I was so busy, I just tapped into something I didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And there I just wrote. Something like that could easily have happened for Smith.
You might want to consider starting a church.
I actually told Brian Hales this, and he deleted my comment. And I told him how many words and how many pages I wrote in 2 months.
He deleted your
comment. That's a sign of a real truth seeker.
I said, there's such a thing as a muse, and I tapped into it la-di-da, and it was like, it didn't, like, he deleted it.
Yeah, it's not the first time I run into Brian Hales deleting stuff.
Information, you know?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a true Mormon.
That's what I want to say.
Well, thank
That's
you.
fascinating, Zelik. Zelik?
And I actually did it twice in a row. I did a second book that same way.
Look at
really?
Getting a second master's in English.
Well, you see, this is
quickly wrote it like the same thing.
That's amazing.
And I had a new nursing baby by then. Yeah,
this is a thing that's been around for,
so busy.
Yeah, as you know, thousands of years, at least back to the Greeks, where they believed that they were muses, and I think they were 7 in number. And there's, Terpsichore, the muse of dance, and Chloe, and all these things, and poetry, and the idea that that sometimes when what Mormons would call the Holy Ghost, or Christianity probably in general, this inspiration that comes from seeming from a source outside, has been identified as different things by different cultures throughout the ages. Even Stephen King wrote a little short story where he's trying to answer the question, where the hell do all my ideas come from? Because at some point when you are a very creative person, you've got the knack, it seems like it's coming from outside of you. And we've all had that experience, I think, in the church, where an idea comes to us that seems new and fresh, and it's like, I didn't think that up. It came to me from outside of me. So we call it the Holy Ghost or God. They would call it a muse, and sometimes it can light up, and you just have that gift flowing through you as if it's not part of you. And I'm not here to say, maybe it isn't part of you, maybe it is. But it is something that occurs inside and outside of Christianity and has for a long time. And it's really fascinating that you had both of those experiences in your life.
Yeah. All right. So I ended that call. So, because
I'm sorry.
We were done with Zelik. So anyway.
The great Zelik.
Yeah, the great Zelik, which is a new name as well. So new names get created. That happens,
Yeah. Except Zelik, I think, it's not a new name.
I'm just teasing.
Okay.
It could be someone's new name.
All names were new at some point. At some point, somebody said, whatever the name is, John, any name, it had to be new at some point. So, what do you think, Bill? Are we ready to end this show, or?
Yeah, let's call it a night, and we'll pick up next week with Dan Vogel and try to squeeze in the last 39 slides.
Yeah. Yeah, if nothing else, hopefully Brian Hales will have heard about this by then, and he'll come back and he'll be in the live chat.
We'd love to have Brian on to ask these kinds of questions.
He could defend what's left of his honor.
Yeah, well, what's left.